Give me your opinion on design build.
Do you really want my opinion on design build?
Yes.
Like, I desperately want your opinion on
Based
design
off
build.
of that response, definitely.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to get some people upset about this, but contractors are more practical most of the time. I mean, they see schedule, they see the budget. That's just how you're trained to think. And architects are like, yes, I'm going to put everything I can out there that I want to see in this, and then leave it up to the contractor to try to have to cut this out, right? You don't have a good balance when somebody is underneath somebody else.
What's up, everybody? We had Melanie Ford with us today, and she is the Senior Director of Construction at University of Georgia. We got to peer over that fence that so many of us want to peer over and look into the world of an owner to see what she deals with every day, get some opinions on construction delivery methods, which is interesting because we go over CM, design build, and even learn about a new delivery method that she schooled us up on. Great conversation. Really felt like it gave us some perspective. We hope you enjoy the show.
You're studying, it was your master's in landscape architecture.
Correct.
Okay. Which I think is really cool because you're already like senior director at UGA and all of that stuff. Okay. Have you looked up the Crystal Palace at all? Because we did an episode on this recently. It's okay if you didn't listen. I won't hold it against you.
Good. I'm glad you won't. I've heard some of your episodes, not all of them.
This one you might actually find fascinating. So the guy that designed the building was a landscape architect.
Okay. Wow.
So, and it was like basically modeled after a greenhouse.
Okay.
So I don't know. I just thought it was
the Crystal
interesting.
Palace the one that it's all glass and steel?
Mm-hmm.
And
it burned down and like it's no longer in existence.
Okay.
But yeah, so we covered it. It was 1850. Guys, I'm having to remember.
I'm going to
this,
have to look it up then.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah, it's fascinating story, and hearing how he approached it, and was a landscape architect that ended up building this amazing structure back in the mid 1800s. I don't know, it just kind of resonated with me.
Doesn't surprise me because the way they did things back then, I mean, it was really all about what your craft was, and it was all learn on the go. I mean, like you might have been trained in something, but it was really a completely different art than it is now in some sense. And so people that were good at that were able to do a whole bunch of other things. So it doesn't surprise me to hear that.
If you like period pieces, like BBC stuff, like there's a lot of history that plays into it. And yeah, we could meander after that like all day. So way to go, Tyler. Nice setup.
Hey, I'm just saying, you said landscape architecture. I just wanted to know because that's a really interesting part of that story. But anyway, I thought that was cool. But thanks for coming and joining us. So
Thanks for having me.
Give us a little bit of background on you. You started out, you went to Auburn first.
So I grew up in Alabama. My dad was an engineer. His degree is something like mechanics of engineering.
Okay. And
really smart guy, has his doctorate. He went to Purdue and Cornell, and then he went for his undergraduate at Purdue. Cornell, he went for his master's, and then he ended up with a doctorate at University of Florida, which is kind of how we ended up in the South. And then he got a job in Huntsville, Alabama, which is where I grew up, very high-tech town. Yeah. And I had planned to be an engineer, and I was going to be an engineer because that's what my dad was, and it was natural fit. And then just before I was about to go to college, my dad said, "Don't be an engineer. I don't think you'll like it." And it literally threw me for a spin because I didn't know what I was going to do then. And this is kind of silly, but I decided from one day in an art class, and I drew a window using a ruler, and I went, I should go into architecture school. That's what I'll do instead of engineering. And so I ended up going to Auburn for architecture. I went through 2 full years of it, started my 3rd year, and the person that kind of always talked me through things, kept me grounded, had decided to co-op. And so I was there by myself kind of floundering, and we were supposed to draw a structure of some sort. This was the first foray into actual, can you build something that's going to stand up? And so I was trying to draw something structural, and the only kind of structure I really knew about for some reason was 2x4s. And we had to build a model of what we were doing, and we had 2 of them we had to do. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. I built my little 2x4 jail cell. And I'm looking at it and looking at the structure. I'm going, this doesn't look architectural at all. It looks like a jail cell. And so then I had to think about what was my second structure and build a model. And it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and the project was due at 8 o'clock the next morning. I'd never turned in anything late in my life. And I was kind of freaking out about it. And I didn't even know where to start. I didn't know anything about structures. And all this time I'd been taking building science classes. And so I thought, I really am not happy in the architecture program. I'm just going to switch into building science. And so that's what I did. I literally left a note on a piece of, I don't know if they still call it trash paper, but a piece of trash paper, the, tracing paper stuff. And it said, I don't know if you're probably not old enough to remember this commercial, but it was some little girl going, I just don't want to do it. And that's the truth. And she sticks out her tongue and kind of blows a raspberry. And so I literally wrote on this, I just don't want to do this. And that's the truth. And drew a tongue with like spit coming off of it. And I had it kind of like stuffed up. And it wasn't a message for anybody other than myself, like talking through this.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm just not going to come back. Like, I'm going to go, as soon as class starts in the morning, I'm going to go straight to the dean's office and I'm going to switch into building science. And so I did. And that was kind of a funny story in itself, because the dean, I'm 58 years old, and going into construction, when I was in college 30-something years ago, was not the thing to do for a female.
Yeah.
And so I went and talked to my professor, and he said, literally, he said, you can probably be an estimator or something. He said, I can't see you telling some 50-year-old hard hat wearing man where the hell he can put his steel. Then I said, okay, all right, I'm good with that. Estimating, what is estimating? Yeah, sounds good to me. I'll do that. And so like 3 days later, I went to gather my stuff up, and the professor had found that little note with the tongue on it and said, is this a message for me? And I just remember kind of being a little bit embarrassed and like, no, gathered up all my stuff, packed it up, and kind of like disappeared and just didn't go back. But I will say that being in construction has been a phenomenal career for me. I think it was definitely the right move. And I've had a really good career in it. So
you came out of college, you went straight into a construction company after that, right?
Yeah, I graduated from college, and I ended up getting a job at Winter Construction.
Okay, yeah.
The 2 owners at the time, Arnie and Bob Silverman, had bought the company. They were from New York. So they were a little bit progressive. And I was, my last name, my maiden name is Bernstein.
Okay.
And their last name is Silverman. And so I have since asked Arnie, did you give me a chance because I was Jewish? Because I had interviewed several places and nobody wanted to have anything to do with me.
Yeah.
One construction company, at my interview, it was at the placement office. They actually like packed up their stuff when I walked in the door. And I was the last interview. He asked me 3 questions, what's your name? What do you think you're going to do, when you graduate? So
why do you think, why do you think that is? Like, do you think that was because you're a woman in the industry?
Oh, absolutely. It was a relatively new thing. There were literally only 2 women in the building science class program, or the building science program at all. There was only, and then anybody, even in architecture, there weren't as many women. They were mostly in the interior design program. And so it was, I'm not going to mention names on that one, but it was a really well-known construction company out of Atlanta and Birmingham. And it was the owner's son who was still involved in the business. And literally, I walked in the door. He started packing up his stuff. And I was just like, okay, I don't think I even ever sat down. I think I was standing in the doorway. So.
Good grief.
So I thought, I'm never going to find a job.
Yeah.
And I had this interview at Rust Engineering and was told they have to hire a female. They got dinged by the federal government. All they do is federal government work. And they flew me and the other girl out there. Neither one of us got the job. And I just thought, I'm never going to find a job. And then when this Winter Construction, offered me a job, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is absolutely amazing. So, but it was the best thing that could have happened. It's fantastic. Arnie Silverman's just a fantastic mentor.
We hear stories like that. I feel like sometimes, but they're kind of like off to the side kind of stories, like, this happened, that sort of thing. So I'm glad you said that, Because it's just an example of like kind of some of the things that you've had to deal with, especially in your time, because it was a 30-year career, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
At least. Yeah.
Have you seen any progress in that regard?
Absolutely. Yes.
Are we still dragging our knuckles and being
no, definitely not
ogres?
dragging knuckles or anything like that. And I have definitely seen lots of improvements, and there are so many women in the construction industry now. And I will say it's still, a much lower percentage, but you see a lot more women actually in the trades. Have a friend who is an electrician, have another one who's a plumber that works for one of the local plumbers in Athens, Georgia, and they are doing phenomenally well. People are fostering it now. And if you can find somebody that's interested in that, and then as project managers and stuff, there's just a ton of them. So,
yeah. So you worked at Winter for a long time.
Worked at Winter.
And then after that, when did you come into UGA?
So I worked for Winter for 12 years, and 7 years after I started working for them, they got a job in Athens, Georgia. It was the Classic Center. And so they ended up sending me over there to do that project and did that. And then after we finished that project, I had fallen in love with Athens. At the time, I had a 2-year-old son, and we were in Atlanta, and you never met anybody in Atlanta unless you purposely went there to meet them, right? So we go to to Athens, and I had him in preschool there, and I got to where I liked the town so much, I just kind of ended up staying there. My husband at the time, he would come over, he worked in Atlanta, and so he'd come over on the weekends, and we would just stay in Athens. And then I was with, my son's name's Dominic, I was with him one time, we were at the park on the weekend, and some little boy comes over and run there like standing this far apart, and he's like, hey, and I'm like, oh my God, he has a friend, like, he knows somebody. And so I just realized I wanted to stay in Athens. And so Winter let me kind of start an office for them there and just ran it out of the basement of the Classic Center, and it was an unfinished basement. And so I can really say I paid my dues, had no heat or AC, it flooded periodically. And, it was just one of those things where I just, was staying there until we got our office established. And then finally felt like, we'd made a name for ourselves. People were starting to trust us because it's a small town. It's hard to get people to like really, feel like that you're invested in their town. We were this big construction company coming in out of Atlanta. And so we were starting to grow, and then there was just a whole bunch of, politics things going on in the background. And at some point, we did have an office there, and then they decided that we weren't making enough money for them, I guess. And so they just basically told me I could stay there. I could, work out of my house, keep my 3 superintendents, and just do stuff that way. But I felt like I had worked so hard to get a name for ourselves, and people were starting to like really invest in me as, a contractor there. And so the short version is when that happened, I ended up partnering with a local construction company there, Whitsel Construction. And so Curtis Whitsel was the owner of that, and he made me vice president, and we had a partnership deal that we structured. And so we were in business together for about 8 years. So I worked for Whitsel Construction there for the next 8 years before I got over to UGA.
Got it.
And basically, I'll just be honest with you, the economy tanked. It was 2007. And so I ended up, I had 3 kids in private school because unfortunately the school system in Athens is at that point was not very good. It has since started to like really change. But at that point it was a terrible school system. And so I had my kids in private school, and the economy was tanking, and I needed some security for my kids. And so this job, a job came open at UGA, and I applied for it, and then they found out that I had applied for that job, which wasn't necessarily the right job for me. And they said, hey, we're opening up a job that we've been trying to get started for a construction management position here at UGA, and apply for that. And so I applied for it and ended up getting the job. And so I've been there for the last 16 years.
So at UGA, what's your function like? What do you do as Senior Director of Construction there?
So my role is I oversee all of the construction on campus. And I want to clarify, there's a facilities management department, and they also do some minor construction projects, and they do the major infrastructure projects. But we do all of the major capital projects, and we do all of the major renovations. And so my job is for those projects to oversee all of the construction. So when we award to a contractor, once they are actually engaged in the project, then I make sure that everything is typical, quality is good, we're staying within budget and schedule, making sure that all that, but there is a project manager assigned to each project from our office. So I'm working in tandem with them. I'm kind of like the extra set of eyes to make sure that things are doing what they're supposed to. And then the bigger picture is just making sure that there's some continuity across campus so that we are managing everything the same way.
So you guys have got a new softball facility going right now.
Mm-hmm, we do.
I imagine you're right in the middle of that.
Yes.
And you're trying to get that open for SEC championships. Am I correct in that?
Yes. Hopefully so. I mean, and when you think about all of the national championship stuff, I mean, just construction world and athletics at our campus just exploded. So we literally have construction going on with every single athletic sport that there is on campus. So not only are we doing the new softball project, we also have a new indoor tennis facility for the same reason, so they can host some of the matches there. And then we just tore down the one that was there, building a new one. We are doing an expansion to the stadium, which is a fan-friendly, concessions, bathrooms, like those types of additions. We have just did some stuff for basketball with the new weight training room. We're about to renovate. We've got a master plan going on for Segma Coliseum right now. So about to renovate some of that. I don't know if you've heard about the new track and field thing, but we have a huge new track and field complex that is going to be built across the street from where the soccer softball is. And that we're in master planning stages. Just saw the initial drawings for that.
How many projects do you think you have going right now? Like you rattled off quite a few just there.
A lot. There's a lot. We're redoing the whole Science and Agriculture Hill right now.
Yeah.
All the old 1950s, 60s, 70s buildings, we are completely gutting and renovating like a domino thing.
Yeah.
We just finished those new iSTEM facilities to enable this. I could spout for hours about everything we have going on campus.
I would imagine and the biggest priority has to be scheduled for most of these things. Because you have athletic events happening, especially like you talk about UGA football. I mean, come on, you can't be in the way there.
Yeah, no.
That's got to be brutal.
It is. You have to get things done for a timeline for those. And same thing with all the buildings on campus. They are based around their completion date is based around when is the semester supposed to start? What do we have to have done so that we can get students in there? We have a lot of summer renovations for housing facilities and for the dining facilities as well. So those are, and then obviously stuff that has to be done for road construction or anything we've got to do, any kind of improvement stuff for students to come back.
Yeah, the volume of projects that you're dealing with, and then the complexity of you got some that you're trying to renovate a building from 1950 something, and you've got others that are new ground up construction. But that new ground up construction is going probably into congested areas. You don't get some free and easy open field a whole lot, I wouldn't imagine.
Not often. We have a couple of those on our farms. Riverbend Farms, we're doing a new facility out there, and those are kind of fun. A lot of people are familiar with Iron Horse Farm, and on Highway 15, built a whole huge complex out there, and those were my favorite projects. I've got pictures of us sitting around like the silo in the background, and then us sitting in metal chairs having our meetings outside, and those were my most favorite days because you've got your meetings out on the farm, and it's like the whole pace of the world just changes. But we're about to do a new dining wellness facility and a new, what we call it's kind of funny because we just last year opened up the new first year residence hall, and now we have another new first year residence hall. We have really great creative names for our projects when they start. And both of those are going right in the middle of campus on congested areas of stuff, and a new West Campus parking deck. And so I call the West Campus parking decks Thing 1 and Thing 2 because we already have a West Campus parking deck, and now we have another West Campus parking deck, and it's going to be Parking Deck 1 and Parking Deck 2. So I kind of joke, I'm like, it's Thing 1 and Thing 2. But
it's very clever. Yeah.
So, all right, our whole purpose and our whole thinking behind this is, obviously it's just fun to talk to you and just hear about everything that's going on. We have a lot of PMs. We have a large swath of people that listen to us across the industry, but mainly our mom, but also project managers specifically. And so you bring an interesting perspective as an owner, as somebody that's got all these projects going. Like, we're looking for feedback. Like, what can project managers within construction companies do better? Take it beyond project managers if you want to. What are kind of the thorns in your side in your day-to-day operations? What grinds your gears, I guess?
Well, in day-to-day operations, it's one, a lot of things we do now are construction management based. And so you have time to plan. And so like with the chemistry project renovation we're doing right now, it's called Science and Ag Hill Phase 1. We renovated the whole chemistry building. The building sat empty for I can't tell you how many months before, everybody's moving out of it. Do your research ahead of time. Go investigate everything. You are part of the planning and design team. And what grinds my gears is not going and looking at existing conditions and paying attention to what needs to happen. And I will say the contractor that's on that did a lot of that. But there's like things that you run into and things that now the project's 5 months from being completed and we're still encountering things. And it's not just that contractor, it's all of them for the most part. And it's like there's so many things that you can plan and think about ahead of time, but you're so busy with all of your other projects that you don't allocate the time to be able to do this with this one when you could avoid a bunch of stuff. And so it's those types of things that I feel like are problematic. And the other thing is just the communication. I want everything to be open book. Tell me if you have a problem because I can help. So just for instance, on this one project, all of the switchgear came in and it was supposed to come in disassembled so you can fit it into the room. And it came in all put together. And so trying to get in touch with the manufacturer to get them to come out and disassemble it so that you don't void the warranty, get it into the room and reassemble it. And don't ask if we've already thought about cutting the door way bigger because we have, but it's a solid, thick concrete structural wall. So by the time we got the engineering done on that and then tried to cut it, they're going to be able to get here. But what I'm being told is they're not going to get here for a month to be able to do this, and it's schedule critical, right?
Yeah.
And so why didn't you tell me about this when it first happened? Because we have some pull. UGA is a pretty big entity. We use a lot of equipment by this manufacturer, and maybe we can help. And I find that across the board that they want to keep things to themselves. They want to solve the problem because that's what project managers do, right?
Yeah.
But it's okay to ask for help. And that is one of the biggest lessons I had to learn going to work at UGA after being a contractor was that there's a whole team there. My background's contracting, but in our office, we have architects, landscape architects, historic preservationists, civil engineers, you name it, we've got somebody on our team. And relying on those people for their areas of expertise was a hard lesson for me to learn because I wanted to wrap my arms around everything and take care of everything.
Yeah.
But the contractors that have been at our campus for a while, no, hey, maybe Melanie knows somebody. And a lot of times I do just because it's not like this isn't the first time we've run into this problem, right?
My perception of like maybe how the university would be almost mandated to do business would be more of a hard bid type of thing. But I'm hearing that you've got a relational side of this business.
Absolutely.
How do you create that relational side? I mean, is most of your work like you're CM on most of your work, you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. So, but you're creating relationships out of that. So you've got people that are coming back and working with you on the regular.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are still some universities in other states that have to bid everything. Auburn University is one of them. And I know a lot of the facilities guys there, and we talk a fair amount about, how do you do certain things? And then there are still some entities in the state of Georgia that are private sector campuses that haven't bought in yet to construction management, and I'm not sure if I'm familiar with task order contracting, but that's an avenue that we have as well. Are you guys familiar with task order contracting?
Tell us about it.
I'm not, yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we do with this whole construction management initiative, and this is state approved, top down, I'll just be honest with you, Georgia Tech was doing it before we were, and we learned from Georgia Tech. We have a really good working relationship with them between our different entities. And we share a lot of information, do the same thing with Emory University. And so they had this task order contracting where if there's one of the things that's very difficult about working for government agency is getting things done in a timely manner.
Yeah.
And if you follow the whole process of bidding something or doing qualifications-based selection, which is what this construction management approach is. If you follow all of that, it takes time. You have to advertise for 30 days. You have to get in your proposals. You have to evaluate them, shortlist. Then you have to have interviews, and then you can select somebody. And so on these smaller projects, we don't necessarily have the time to do those things and still get the work done. So a task order contracting is where you have contractors that you already have as an extension of your staff. We have selected them on a qualifications-based process. And now I have this pool of task order contractors that if we have a smaller project that comes up, and it's typically a project under $1 million, if I have one of those, then I can just pick a contractor that's already on our extended staff, and we can award the work to them. And so we have several task order contractors, and we spread the work around based on what their niche is. A couple of them do metal buildings. And so if we have a metal building come up, then that's somebody who I would call on to do that. Some of them do interior renovation only. Some of them do lab work, and that's their specialty. Some of them want to do exterior site and hardscapes and those types of things. And so we have these contractors that I pull from to do that. So we definitely have relationships with them. And then we have other larger contractors as well that aren't a good fit for these smaller projects. And there's some that, come work on our campus once and wasn't a good relationship and they don't want to come back. And honestly, sometimes we don't want them back. But then we have others that have been there, done work a few times, and, seems like it's a really good working relationship. And it helps because they know our design standards. They know. And that's one other thing, talking about what's helpful for, people know our design standards. They're online. Anybody can go and look at them. So if you are familiar with those, that's something you can pitch in a, qualifications-based selection. So it's, making sure that we are being good partners for each other.
I would imagine that there's a lot of work that falls under that $1 million umbrella.
Absolutely.
So you've got a lot of work that you've got a short list of contractors that you're going to that you've built relationships with.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
And we have to renew those every 5 years.
Yeah.
So, everybody, if you don't perform well, you're not coming back, quite frankly. And then there are other contractors that always want a shot at it. And so when these roll off, then we look as well, are they the right fit, or are there some of these others that are applying for it that are, we actually have that coming up. That we will be advertising in January for a new round of task order contractors because we have, I think, 4 that are rolling off.
It's interesting you brought up Auburn because I know we talked with Gordon over at Bailey Harris. That's in Alabama. Like that's a state of Alabama thing, isn't it? Like the way they contract is actually like state law. Mm-hmm. So that's a little different in Georgia. We're able to do a little different.
Our state law used to be the same. And then there were modifications made based on, I assume, lobbying. All this was before, I was at UGA, and Georgia Tech is the leader in that, discussing that, presenting it. And so now the state of Georgia, state law, does allow for qualifications-based selection as a process. It also still allows for hard bid. And there are plenty of entities that still want to hard bid things. Mm-hmm. But what we have learned, we have this amazing case study where the cabins at Rock Eagle, there are a whole lot of cabins out there.
Yep.
And we took them offline 6 at a time and tore them down, built new cabins. And we did several of those hard bid and several of them construction manager based. And we actually presented this at a COA conference in Georgia. And you can do literally a compare and contrast. What were the pros and cons of both? There's definitely some, cost savings benefit in the beginning, potentially on a hard bid, but what you pay for in either change orders, schedule extension, aggravation, lawsuits. Yeah. It's just a world of difference. And so it just depends on, are you willing to be one of those people that wants to stay in a fight the whole time and you're okay with the schedule? The ones that were hard bid, they ran over on schedule every single time. At least that's my recollection. I know for sure 2 of them did, and I think maybe we hard bid 3 of them. So there may have been one that did not run over schedule. But the relationships, the ease of the work, the quality of the work was just vastly different when you do the construction manager based. And so it's a fantastic case study.
Well, hard bid, you're going with a lot of times somebody that you don't know. So like you're actually with CM, you're actually able to bring somebody else to the table it's a known entity and that you work well with. Mm-hmm. Am I misunderstanding that, I guess? I want to make sure that I understand the differences here.
So sometimes hard bid, are people that you know and are familiar with, especially in
Right.
Athens, where you are it's a small town and you have contractors that are the same contractors, in the mix, and some choose to hard bid and some choose to CM and some do both.
Yeah.
CM, it's not always somebody you have a relationship with.
Okay.
So we're always open to new contractors coming in. So we recently just shortlisted for a project that we've got coming up, and there's 2 contractors that we shortlisted 3. There's 2 contractors that we do know and a third that we don't know. And their qualifications were better than for this particular type of project than 2 other companies who we did know. There were 5 people that submitted. We shortlisted 3, the 2 that we didn't accept. We know them and we think very highly of them and they do great work, but their qualifications were not as good as this particular firm that's new to us that submitted. So we're going to give them a shot,
Yeah.
And if nothing else, if it doesn't work out, at least we know what they're like. We get to know their personality. We find out what their interests are. We see how they present. And you talk about contractors and project managers and what do they want to know? One of the things is take the opportunity to ask for feedback. So I am always happy to provide feedback. So when we get done with interviews and they call me afterwards and they go, hey, can I have some feedback? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And maybe they don't want to hear it, but I am brutally honest about things.
Yeah.
And I will tell them, what did you do poorly? What did you do well? What do you need to improve on? What do I want to see? What type of thing do I want to see again? And we're allowed to do that as long as there isn't an actual open thing that they are submitting on right then. And there's not one that's been advertised. So if there's one that's been advertised that they could potentially submit on, I can't talk to them during that window. But any other time, fair game.
Does the door swing both ways?
Absolutely.
Okay, so do you ask for that feedback after you close a project out?
It depends on the situation. I can't honestly say that I'm going to go to somebody and say, hey, tell me how I did.
Yeah.
But I feel like I've established relationships with some of these contractors enough that they are, some of them will tell me, some of them won't. But they know that I'm open to it. I mean, I try to be very fair about things, and I don't have a problem with somebody giving me constructive criticism. I mean, I know that I need it sometimes because, like I said, I'm brutally honest, and sometimes people don't want to hear that, and it's hard for me to step back from that.
I think being brutally honest, many times the personality that is brutally honest values that honesty in return as well. And so, but that's, it's part of the heart of our show, right? Is this feedback loop, making each other better.
Right.
A lot of times it's easier to digest the feedback in a situation like this than it is in a one-on-one.
Well, sure.
You know what I mean? Like you're not as tense.
Well, yeah, read the room.
Yeah, read the room.
Yeah. If you're tone deaf to the situation, everything's really tense and you're like, let me tell you all of your transgressions. It's not going to go very well. Come on. I'm curious with, just the initiation of projects. Maybe it's a little bit of an enigma to me. Like you have an idea that comes from somewhere on campus, like it gets initiated by somebody, and it finally makes it to the place where you're shown this idea from somebody. I don't know who that comes from, but they say, guess what, Melanie, you're going to get to build something. Do you get handed that designed? Like, does that all get taken care of beforehand? And all of a sudden you just have what designers have already done and it's yours to take, have, hold, and do something with? Or do you get to be a part of that too?
So the way our office in particular works is exactly what you said. There's a project that comes into our office. Sometimes we're on the front end of that and helping to orchestrate that because we have a master plan on the campus. But sometimes there's a project that just pops up out of nowhere because one of the colleges has had a vision for a while and a legislator wants to, figure out how to fund this, or they get private funding from somebody. Perfect example. There was at our botanical gardens, there was a woman who had a porcelain collection. And when I thought porcelain, I was thinking it was, like little porcelain figurines.
Like porcelain dolls or something like that.
But it's amazing what all is made out of porcelain, including some toilet seats and all kinds of stuff, shaving bowls. And so she had this incredible porcelain collection. She was very elderly. And she had a fair amount of money, and she wanted to donate this porcelain collection to the university. So she also donated some of the funding, a large portion of it, to build a building to house the porcelain collection. And then it was up to the botanical gardens to figure out, how can I relate this to the botanical gardens? And they chose to focus on the materials that came out of the earth that were used to fabricate some of this porcelain, and did an amazing job with the architect that was hired to figure out how to translate this into meaning on the walls and in the displays. So, project that gets handed to us. So our role then is to find the right designer and the right contractor to build this building. So I personally do not have any say in the selection of the architects. I have some say in the selection of the contractors. I'm one of the voting members. But the design professional, we have right now an open position for senior director of design, which we just had the interviews for that. But my immediate boss, who's the associate vice president of our office, she's an associate vice president for design and construction, or facilities, I guess officially is what it's called. But she is the one who's been steering the design for a long time, because this position has been vacant for a while. And so she's the one who kind of oversees the design selection. And then my involvement comes because we select a contractor so early. Kind of the key to get Melanie involved is, when is the first set of pricing due? Because one of my main roles is to review pricing, make sure that it seems realistic for what we're doing based on the state of the economy, the size of the contractor, the scope of work. And so when we get our first set of pricing in, which is sometimes there's a budget price analysis and sometimes it's schematic design pricing, and then they bring me in, I get to get caught up on, what does the design look like? What are all these things? Does this seem reasonable? And so to some extent, I'm involved in all of that, but really, on the front end of things, it's for constructability type of reviews. It's for, the pricing type of thing. It's schedule impact. It's all of those basic contractor type of questions, not so much the fun design part.
That's interesting. I would have thought it would have been a cradle to grave sort of thing. So I'm glad you asked that.
It is for the project manager.
Okay.
So the project manager assigned to each project stays from very beginning to the end.
Okay.
And then the senior director of design will provide some continuity across campus for the design reviews. And then I provide the continuity for construction reviews. And then I stay, once it's the senior director of design stays involved during the design process and all the meetings. And then once it transitions to actual construction, I try to go to, especially for our major capital projects, I go to all of the owner architect contractor meetings. And I try to keep my mouth shut and let the project manager do what they're supposed to do. But sometimes I don't do a very good job of that, I will admit. That's one of those, give me some feedback. I'm sure all of my project managers would say, sometimes stop stepping on my toes. So,
Give me your opinion on design build.
do you really want my opinion on design build?
Yes.
I desperately want your opinion on
Based
design
off
build
of that
because-
response, definitely.
Yeah. Yes. Please.
I personally am not a fan. We do some design build projects. If it's a metal building, yes, I'm in favor of it. But if it's anything else, I'm not in favor. And the reason being that you lose some control, and because whoever is under the other person, if the contractor takes the lead, which is usually what happens, then the architect, a lot of their information doesn't get translated over to us, and all we're seeing is the contractor side of things, and the architect is not afraid, but they're trying to be loyal. They're trying to do, keep the chain of command, running up through the contract chain of command like they theoretically are supposed to. But you get a different building, in my estimation, than you would if the architect was driving some things. And everybody accuses me of being contractor friendly because that's my background, but it's more about, I think everybody can agree, contractors, and they're probably going to get some people upset about this, but contractors are more practical most of the time. I mean, they see schedule, they see the budget, that's just how you're trained to think. And architects are like, yes, I'm going to put everything I can out there that I want to see in this, and then leave it up to the contractor to try to have to cut this out, right? And so I think you don't have a good balance when somebody is underneath somebody else, regardless of who is the entity that we're contracting with. That's my 2 cents.
You want builder and designer looking at each other as peer.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I want the owner to be one of those peers. I want everybody to be able to say what you feel. What do you think makes sense? I think there are times when the design should be more than just the practical functionality. I mean, I love looking at buildings. And when you look at the older historic buildings and what the craftsmanship, I want to still see some of that in our buildings.
Yeah.
And if we're leaving it up to the contractor, a lot of times, they're just not trained that way. I mean, there are some, I feel like I have some design sensibility, but certainly I don't see it the way an architect does.
Yeah, you say you get a different building, and I immediately, when you said that, thought, well, I wonder if that building comes to you faster and cheaper, but at the cost of some of the things that you would want to see, like that an architect would, maybe prioritize more, like the aesthetic of the building, the feel of the building, maybe even how environmentally friendly the build was, the LEED status of the building.
Mm-hmm. It's all of those things, but it's also, when you think about a contractor designing a building, they're not, having been in this myself and, trying to do, we used to do mechanical, electrical, plumbing design as a contractor. I'm like, our subcontractors can do this. We don't have to hire an engineer. We can do it less expensively. These guys are licensed to be able to do it. And so when I first came to the University of Georgia, one of the first projects I did, they were short on funds. And I said, well, let's just do a design build with the MEP, and that'll be a great idea. And there's all those things that they just aren't trained to think about and to do. And so we had a few hiccups with things and things that, we were adding in after the fact. And I know you do some of that anyway, but this was a lot that just wasn't really thought about because I was the one kind of leading the charge, and the forethought wasn't given to it. And so the other thing that I see with the design build is that if a contractor is leading it and there's not enough meetings with the architect and the end user, are you getting all of the thoughtfulness in about the layout and how things are planned and how it's really going to function at the end? What's the ease of getting to, another space? Do you have to circumvent it and go around? I mean, that's kind of a simplistic thing to say, but
yeah.
So I want to brainstorm with you a little bit. We were involved in what I'll describe as, and what I have previously described as, a golf entertainment venue series of builds. And that was initiated by somebody who was out of Georgia Tech. They were the person in charge of construction. The setup was that the architect was hired by the owner. The consultants were hired by the design builder. And it was an interesting thing because, and it didn't dawn on me until you were talking. That's why I wanted to bring it up. The architect and the design builder were in a peer-based relationship with the owner. The consultants, which were, if we're honest, like structural and MEP consultants, they're much more, that's constructability-based design. They were under that design builder. So there was a lot of attention to cost and just economy of design and things like this. But that wasn't at the expense of gutting the building and making it look ugly. What is your thought on that? Because I've been a participant in public university work around the state here, and I have seen what architects put out. And then I have also seen the coordination of those designs. And I'll bait you. What is your feeling on an architect's natural ability to be the manager and coordinator of the consultants?
So I think that's a role that they play well in general because they know what's supposed to happen. But what you're talking about sounds very much like what I was talking about, where you have, the subcontractors are the ones designing the MEP, except for the fact that these are engineers that you're referring to, so they, can see the design better. But what you made me think of is the design assist with an MEP firm, where the contractor, there is a consultant that's hired by the architect that does the MEP design, but you have your MEP design assist partners so that they could help lend some practical perspective on things about how are we really going to build it. And I've seen that work really well. Mm-hmm. So what are my thoughts about what you said? I think that, from like you said, it's a practical perspective of things. And I think that in some sense could work really well, but the architect also doesn't have the control that they need to have to be able to get, because they're not under them, to be able to wrangle them in. I mean, you're kind of like a step removed. And so when you're trying to get responses out of the engineers, or you're trying to get the drawings produced, is really what I'm thinking about, trying to get all that information there. I think it's harder when they're under somebody else, and the communication is not going to be as free flowing. And so I could see there being more disconnects in the design if you approached it that way, but that may not be the case from what you encountered. But that's my immediate thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, many times, I guess if I notice, I probably notice because something's off, right? I mean, you don't notice when everything goes right. When everything goes right, you're like, I went like it's supposed to go.
I'm awesome. Move on.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Isn't that the funny part of construction is we notice all the bad things because those are the noticeable things.
Those are the nuisances during our day. The bad things.
That's what I'm dealing with, right?
Yeah, things that don't come up, but you get your lessons learned from all the things that go wrong. And you're like, why did it go wrong? Because it went right here and I never noticed it before. That's exactly what you're saying.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess by nature, I notice when the consultants and the architect aren't on the same page. That's when it comes up. So like when the grids don't match, when there's a blatant and obvious bust between the systems, like the architect and the engineer don't look like they've really even been in the same room or talked to one another. Gaps created by a submittal process is a common one. Just the cadence of submittal, like who got to be the last person to put their pencil down can matter when it comes to an incomplete set, which anything, the 50%, the DD set, whatever it is, like who got to put their pencil down last?
Well, so
things are iterating.
I have to tell you something, okay, and for your sponsor, Bluebeam here. So I'm going to tell you a funny story, but I'm also going to say, when you talk about, Bluebeam and you have the capability of comparing the drawings, like the things that you're talking about, column line being off or something, like those theoretically shouldn't happen anymore, right? Yeah. Because you have a way to check all that stuff and it should be easy enough. And to the submittal stuff, we at UGA, a lot of times if there's a critical submittal or something that's complicated, we put it on Bluebeam and all of the consultants are allowed to comment all at the same time. So it doesn't matter. It's an open working session. Doesn't matter who's last because we're going back and forth and putting comments. But the engineer is ultimately the person that has the authority and the person that is the engineer of record, and it needs to be their decision, right? But how I found out about Bluebeam is the funny story, because you told you how old I am. And so I was working at UGA when technology started really taking off. And I guess I should clarify that Whitsel Construction that I worked for was a very small firm. We did historic preservation restoration, and everything we did was we did stuff on computers, but it was Microsoft Word and Excel. Yeah. And that was all I knew how to use. And we were in Danielsville, Georgia, and I was in, cow country for 8 years. And so then I go work at UGA and I'm like, wow, there's all this technology that has occurred because we were doing smaller projects. There's all this technology that's occurred. And I didn't know a whole lot about any of it. And so I was kind of playing catch up with all this stuff. So I'm in a meeting on the vet school, huge $70 million project or so. And the contractor was kind of telling the architect, hey, you issued this interim set of drawings that wasn't really a full construction set. We were doing, things in phases. And then when they finally sent out the set of drawings, there was an error where they hadn't clouded. So here's your set of drawings, is you have one set and then you have an interim set that's issued that they've clouded everything between that and the first set and that set. Then when they went to the next set, they clouded the changes between that interim set and deleted all the other clouds. But the subcontractors had not seen that interim set. So you had a bunch of missing clouds, and it caused them to make a foundation error. And so then they're talking in this meeting with like 20 people about this error that was made. And then it kind of gets glossed over. And I go, wait a minute. I mean, let's talk about this for a minute. I said, so, what are you doing now? I said, are you, they're like, oh, we're taking care of it. And I said, no, I want to know, are you actively putting these drawings on a light table and you are overlaying them and you're making sure you've caught all the clouds that should have been there? And the contractor kind of looked at me and he stuttered for half a second and he goes, well, yeah, well, yes, kind of like that, but we're using Bluebeam. And I said, oh, okay. I said, what's Bluebeam? I said, is that like the electronic version of a light table? And he started laughing and he said, yes, that's exactly what it is, right? And so literally that same day, I get an email at UGA from the Georgia Museum of Art, which is a UGA campus building. And they said, hey, we have this light table over here and we don't really have a need for it. Do you guys want to have it in your office? Is that, anything that you guys could possibly use? And I'm like, perfect timing. And I shot it over to the contractor and I said, hey, look, I said, people still use light tables. I said, somebody offered me one today. And he said, yeah, look where it is. It's in the museum. Because it was Georgia Museum of Art. And I was just like, okay, touche. You got me on that. So that's how I learned what Bluebeam was and how to start using Bluebeam. So,
well, they're going to love these opened and the lights came.
This was not planned and they're going to love you. And listen to the commercial for the 20% off that we're offering right now, which is pretty amazing too.
Yeah, perfect plug.
An unplanned plug there. That's so when I see that sort of thing complained about, when I hear that sort of thing complained about, there is the Bluebeam side of things. There's also this Revit workflow that it's the interesting part of all this technology and not having the light table anymore. Process is much faster. In a lot of ways, I do miss the tactile
side of
side of absolutely.
Plans in front. Yeah. And it took, I'll say years before I probably just kind of became callous to it and didn't really remember anymore the difference between using a paper set and being on a PDF. The efficiencies of the PDF are just like the draw is too much. And I do miss that. Okay, point. Revit has a workflow where, you basically, your designers are designing, your architect's designing, everybody is in a common environment, right? And depending on how you set it up, the models are updating. And there's kind of an understanding that you're going to be paying attention to model updates. And as that model updates, it's your responsibility to pay attention for those and react to them. And it's insane how much things, good design, well-coordinated design still just comes back to this, like just talking. Yeah. Because if I just make a change and I expect because somebody's like kind of, following the model or we're in this common environment that's just going to be obvious to you. Sometimes changes aren't all that obvious and they slip through. So that's the complaining I hear is, well, they just expect us to just know. On the other side of the thing, the architect, like, do I have to spoon feed you every change? Do I have to, why aren't you kind of keeping up with how this is iterating? Talking is still key to just making sure that's cohesive. And we see the ball dropped a pretty good bit. Because frankly, when we're in, we do steel detailing. That's one of the upfront things. Many times it happens. And a lot of times we get released off of earlier documentation than other trades do. So things aren't quite as cast in stone at that point. And that can mean that there's a little bit of gap between the designers.
I don't know, man. I feel like, and this is kind of back to the point that you made earlier where you're talking about just communicating, just talking, keeping the open line of communication with all subs, everybody around the table is I mean, that has to be the most critical thing for you. Like, it has to.
One of the things that I run into technology-wise, just basic stuff, is email. I mean, talking about, dropping stuff. I get so many emails. I literally cannot keep up with them. And I shouldn't admit this, but my email box is almost full and it's got a lot of space in it. But it's not, one, don't have time to file everything all the time. But also some of the stuff is critical and I can't necessarily, I know you can theoretically file an email, but am I going to be able to find it again when I need it? If it's in my email, it's easy for me to find, but I've spent an inordinate amount of time recently just deleting old emails so that I can make room for new emails to come in. My point being communication. Sometimes, it's better if somebody just picks up the phone and has a conversation instead of 4 or 5 emails going back and forth, asking question after more information is provided. So it takes me, 10, 15 minutes to get through the back and forth emails. Whereas if you just picked up the phone and called, we'd be done in like 3 minutes. Yeah. And then that's one of the things, with the current generation of students and people coming out of school is they don't want to pick up the phone. Yeah. They're used to emailing. And part of it is also on their own time. I don't feel like emailing right now, but I'm awake at 3:00 in the morning, let me email now. And so then it's hours later and I get some of these emails and I'm guilty of sending some of them when I can't sleep, 3:00 in the morning, get all this stuff off my plate. But by the time morning rolls around, I don't remember exactly what all I sent out and, what do I need to follow up on, like those types of things. So I can't stress enough how important it is to communicate.
Do you find, and this is, I'm asking a leading question here. Do you find that email causes more fights than phone calls do?
Absolutely. Because people feel like they can hide behind and they're not afraid to say things. Yeah. You see this in, personal stuff too, obviously. But yes, I absolutely do think it causes more fights than it needs to.
I think the only times I've had fights are because of an email.
Or a miscommunication on email. Somebody not understanding, what you were saying or how to take it. Tone in an email is a whole different ballgame.
We've recently had a diatribe about this whole email phone call thing. He was ranting on the whole basically his generation and below, pick up the phone. It's
right.
Not, it's not the devil.
Well, I mean, yeah, we posted that, I think we posted something on LinkedIn yesterday.
Yeah. And
literally yesterday on email.
It's interesting the back and forth too.
I freaking hate email, man. I freaking hate it. I'm so weird as a millennial that I just hate it because it has caused so many fights because it just tone doesn't convey.
Yeah, no, it definitely doesn't.
You pick up a phone and you're talking to somebody and you're like, I really don't want to sound like a jerk here. How can I say this in a more,
Or you can just say, I don't want to sound like a jerk.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This is coming across wrong. And you can almost clarify just really, really quick. Heck, better than that, just getting face to face, being able to see the facial expressions is huge.
Right.
We've had to come up with freaking emojis in order to convey facial expressions. We're going backwards here, guys. We don't have the capability.
Just use your mouth again.
It's the same thing with Zoom meetings and stuff. Yeah. Because everybody got so used to it and it's so easy. And I can just sit at my desk and we have an internal meeting between our office and the facilities management department where we go through all of our projects together. So we make sure that we're not both working in the same building against each other. We literally these got prompted because we literally were, facilities management was changing out a fire alarm system, finished it. We went in there, we were renovating the whole building. So it was just complete wasted money. We salvaged all the parts we could, redid stuff. We're we don't need to do this. So we have these coordination meetings. Well, we ended up having them over Zoom for probably 2 years. And at some point I just said, I'm done. I said, because I run the meetings. I said, they're in person, period. And everybody's like, well, that means I may not be able to come every time. And I'm like, then I'm sorry, either change your schedule and I don't mean to be ugly, but I am tired of sitting here feeling like I'm talking to myself and half the people zone out and it's just not worth it to me. So now we meet in person and it works out great.
That's another thing. Yeah, there is more of a propensity to just zone out on a Zoom meeting. All right. So a lot of this is great and we could ramble on email for forever. I know I could because I freaking hate it. Anyway, Melanie, we want to ask you our megaphone question, though. That's what we ask everybody. So if we gave you a megaphone that the whole industry could hear in around 60 seconds, we might give you more. It's okay if you go over. It's more like guidelines than actual rules. What would you want to say to the industry? What would you want to leave them with? What would you want to soapbox on?
So my soapbox is really just about communication in general. and making sure that everybody understands we're all in this together. And the whole thing I've learned being at UGA is that it's all about team approach. I mentioned earlier on about that I had a hard time not trying to be a control freak about everything. I wanted to have my hands in all the details. But if you have your best intentions and you are trying, everybody is understanding of that. And I think everybody trying to foster the best in everybody and be teammates. It doesn't have to be an adversarial situation, and who wants to live their life in an adversarial situation? So I think understanding that, we know this is about making money. We know that nobody's doing this for free. And as an owner's rep, we just want everybody to be fair. And as long as you are fair with everything, costs, proposals, changes, et cetera, if you're entitled to it, I have no problem saying you're entitled to it. So I think that's one of the biggest things. And then the other thing I would say is about supporting each other, because one of the things that I have learned, I went through this leadership training thing at UGA. It was UGA Staff Leadership Institute. And one of the things that came out of that long-term for me is it was kind of the premise for what prompted me to start Athens Area Women in Construction. And that organization, I will be honest with you and tell you that we intended to start a chapter of NAWIC, which everybody is familiar with, but they would not let us start our own chapter because we didn't have the minimum number of people to start it. So we had already started meeting in anticipation of that. I had been in contact with some of the national leaders of that organization and was in thought we were going to be able to start a chapter. So we started this homegrown thing. And because we'd already been meeting and everybody was like, yeah, let's just do a homegrown thing. And it has turned into such a phenomenal thing for all of us because there are so many women in the industry that really, literally there were women that thought, we're not sure. The first question we got asked at one of our first meetings was babies. Can you have a family, and can you, as a project manager, and can you also, do your job? How is that looked upon? And it was like life-changing for them to hear that, yes, you can have a family. My youngest child was strapped to my body when she was 5 weeks old, and we went and did a job site walk because, schedules require that kind of stuff. But, I want to be able to do my job. I want to do it well. But I also wanted to be able to have a family. So having examples of things about how you can do those types of things, having people that that are mentoring you or that you see as people that you can ask questions of. I think it's important, whether you're male or female, to be a good role model in this industry for the rest of the people coming up. Nobody knows everything when they start, right? Yeah. And you have to teach them, and taking the time to teach them. And I think that's one thing we do very horribly in this industry is it's all trial by fire, sink or swim. Yeah. There is no formal training process for a lot of the contractors. Some of them do it better than others. But just having a formal training process, it's just shadowing somebody, right? I mean, at least that's been my experience. So I think, recognizing all of that and being able to foster that and provide the patience that you need to foster the training and education and mentoring people, I think is really important.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. That's so good. I don't know why. I just got this visual of you walking around with your little baby and it had a tiny little hard hat.
I did. It's a little Tyke's hard hat. And yes, awesome. Absolutely. And that kid in there is the one that I had strapped to me. But my son has been on job site since he was probably, 6 months old. So.
I love it. That's so cool. That's awesome. Melanie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah. It's a lot of fun.
Hey, I got some bonus content here.
Okay.
Okay, so you're going to get a kick out of this because you went to Auburn and you have been at UGA. But we went over and did our Hilti J-Bot video at the new Culinary Arts building at Auburn. And when we went, Tyler had the bright idea that he was going to buy some Bulldogs folding chairs. And we took them over and we had them, and it was a Bailey Harris site, and we had them and we got them on site. And he was going to do it as like a gag or whatever. Like we were going to be up in the Culinary Arts for Auburn and then bust out the Georgia chairs. Yeah. They did not make it up. They got chucked in the dumpster. And it legit was, we had no idea. And I'm sure Georgia has this same thing.
It's amazing.
No paraphernalia, and it would be paraphernalia from another school was allowed on that site. So like Georgia chairs or a hat or whatever by contract. They were like, no, you're not allowed to have it.
Yep. We had an Auburn, somebody that graduated from Auburn also in the building science program. He was doing an athletics project. And he put up his Auburn flag in his office in the job site trailer.
You're like,
nope, had to take it down.
Like, I'm not doing it. You're like, no, by contract.
I'm going to say, I'm not the one who made him take it down, though. It was somebody else from athletics who made him take it down.
I'm sure somebody was willing to embolden themselves.
I'm positive. I think those chairs totally went in the dumpster. It was frustrating. Brand new chairs, too. I like bought them on purpose.
You could have gone dumpster diving.
I was going to get like a shot while we were shooting the J-Bot video of like me just being like folding it out and just like putting it down, sitting down in it or something. I thought it would be hilarious.
There you go.
They
go dogs.
So,